Red and blue lights tore through the calm morning air, reflecting off the wet pavement like warning signals from another world. Willman Price stood still beside his car, the soft hum of the engine the only sound grounding him in reality. He had just dropped his daughter at school, wearing his uniform shirt hidden under a gray jacket. To him, it was a simple morning. To the officers speeding toward him, it was something else entirely. They saw a man who did not belong. Not the father, not the protector, not the man sworn to uphold the same law they were now weaponizing against him. Commands were shouted, movements rushed. Within seconds, Willman's wrists were cuffed, his dignity pressed against the cold asphalt. None of them knew that in 3 days, the man they had arrested would be sitting in the chief's office, their new leader. Crestfield was the kind of town that hid its tension behind manicured lawns and polite smiles. On paper, it was peaceful, a model suburban community, but beneath the calm veneer, biases moved like invisible currents, shaping who was trusted, who was questioned, and who was followed for driving a nice car. Willman Price had spent over 20 years in law enforcement, rising through the ranks with quiet determination, earning a reputation as both compassionate and unyielding. His leadership style was built on principle, his judgment on fairness. When Crestfield's mayor offered him the position of chief of police, he accepted with one goal: to reform a department rumored for selective enforcement and subtle prejudice. He chose not to announce his arrival. No press release, no introduction. He wanted to observe first, to see how officers behaved when no one was watching. That Friday morning, he drove his daughter to school, promising her pancakes afterward. It was ordinary, until it wasn't. A neighbor, unfamiliar with his face, called in a report of a suspicious man outside the school. The phrase had become a quiet curse in communities like Crestfield, code for fear disguised as concern. As the first police cruiser appeared behind him, Willman sighed. Years of training told him what would happen next. But no training could prepare him for how deeply the moment would cut, to be on the other side of the badge, facing the same judgment he had sworn to dismantle. The officers approached with authority sharpened by assumption. Their boots struck the pavement in rhythm, hands resting near their holsters. Willman's calmness unsettled them. He moved slowly, deliberately, placing both hands on the hood as he had instructed countless others to do in the past. They demanded identification. He tried to explain, voice measured, but his words dissolved beneath the noise of prejudice already made up in their minds. His badge rested quietly in his glove compartment, out of sight, out of belief. They weren't looking for truth, only confirmation of suspicion. The world slowed. Willman felt his face pressed to the cold surface of his car, gravel grinding against his cheek. He caught glimpses of bystanders watching, phones raised, whispers spreading. Some recognized him vaguely, the man who had just moved into the Benson house. But no one stepped forward. The weight of social hesitation pressed heavier than the officer's knee on his back. Inside the patrol car, he sat in silence. The cuffs were too tight, his shoulders aching, but his composure never cracked. It wasn't pride keeping him steady, it was purpose. Every detail, every word exchanged, every careless assumption, he memorized them all. At the station, his belongings were logged, his car searched. Then, one of the officers opened the glove box and froze. The ID stared back at him, laminated and official, bearing the name Chief Willman Price under the city seal. For a moment, silence replaced arrogance. The air turned heavy with disbelief. Willman lifted his gaze, locking eyes with the man who had just arrested him. There was no anger in his expression, only quiet disappointment. Within hours, the news reached the department. Officers whispered in corridors, the story spreading faster than anyone could contain it. By afternoon, every desk sergeant, patrol officer, and city administrator knew. The man they had arrested that morning was their incoming chief. Willman refused to press charges or demand an apology. Instead, he made a decision that surprised everyone. He asked for both officers to remain active. There was a lesson, he said, that punishment could never teach. Monday morning arrived with tension thick enough to taste. Cameras lined the courtyard outside the police station. The press expected a ceremony. What they got was a reckoning. Willman stepped onto the podium in full uniform, the gold badge gleaming against his chest. The officers stood assembled before him, a mix of pride, fear, and shame reflected in their eyes. The two who had arrested him stood in the back, heads lowered. "I want to start my leadership with honesty," Willman began, his voice steady, resonating through the courtyard. 3 days ago, I was detained by officers of this very department. Not because I committed a crime, but because of what I look like. The silence was absolute. The only sound was the wind brushing against the flags behind him. "I am not here to embarrass anyone," he continued. "I am here to expose a truth too many choose to ignore. Prejudice is not always loud. Sometimes it hides behind procedure, policy, or the illusion of safety. But when it surfaces, it destroys the trust that holds this badge together." He paused, scanning the faces before him. Some looked away. Others nodded slowly, realizing the depth of the message. "Being chief does not make me immune to bias. Being a father does not shield me from fear. But as your leader, I will make sure no one wearing this uniform becomes the reason another parent has to explain injustice to their child." The applause began softly, hesitant at first, then grew stronger, carried by a sense of awakening. The two officers remained still, eyes glassy, understanding the weight of what they had done. Willman's words weren't revenge. They were transformation. Weeks passed and the department began to change. Willman didn't chase reform through punishment. He built it through awareness. Bias training was replaced with conversation circles. Every officer was required to walk through the neighborhoods they once watched from behind tinted glass. The two officers became part of that change. Willman assigned them to community programs, working directly with families and youth. Slowly, their rigid views softened. They began to understand what fear felt like from the other side. The story of that arrest became a lesson taught in every training session. Not a scandal, but a symbol of transformation. It reminded every recruit that power without empathy is corruption, and judgment without knowledge is blindness. Crestfield changed too. People noticed the difference. Officers greeting kids by name, patrol cars seen less as threats and more as protection. The invisible wall between police and community began to crack, piece by piece. Every morning, Willman still drove his daughter to school. The same road, the same spot where everything changed. But now, when police cars passed, she waved, unafraid. He would smile quietly, knowing the world still had far to go, but believing change always starts with one moment, one mistake faced with courage. Because real power isn't the badge that commands obedience. It's the heart that earns respect. And sometimes the greatest justice begins when those in power learn what it feels like to be powerless.